Hello and welcome to Shared Value Conversations, the podcast where purpose meets profit and where we talk to change makers who are building a better Africa through business. I'm your host, Kate Onsati, and today we're joined by an inspiring guest, Thabo Limema, a corporate professional, transformational advocate, youth mentor, sustainability champion, and proud African. Thabo's story takes us from the small town of Qwaqwa in the Free State to the heart of the finance sector and into spaces where real impact continues to be made. One conversation, one initiative, one story at a time. Today, we're diving into his journey and unpacking how he lives out the shared value mindset across everything he does. Welcome, Thabo, and thank you for making the time.
Thank you for inviting me, Kate. I look forward to having the conversation with you and to hopefully engaging with your listeners as well.
Great, great. Thank you so much. So, uh, just to get to know you a bit, Thabo, you're known for being quite the storyteller. What is a random fact about you that most people don't know?
A random fact about me. But first, let me come back to the intro that you gave. Right, I think you
Hmm.
beautifully mentioned my name, Thabo. My surname is pronounced Dimema. I think
Okay.
it's a small quirk in the Sesotho language. So in Sesotho, whenever you see an LI, it's pronounced D, and even an LU is pronounced do. So it's something that's influenced by French literature when they went into Lesotho. My paternal family is originally from Lesotho, so we do have that. So I don't know if any of your listeners have been to Lesotho or are Basotho. They will know that LIED. So just
Thank you
a
for
quick
that.
education for everybody that hasn't been to Lesotho and doesn't know that particular fact. But in terms of a random fact about me, yo, look, I've had a bit of a colorful life. I've traveled around very interesting places. What I can add as a random fact is I'm one of the few people I know that has been to North Korea, in
Oh,
Pyongyang
wow.
specifically. It's a country that is well known for being a hermit country. It's very secluded. There's deep
Mm.
tensions between the north and the south part of Korea, due to historical reasons and then other issues. But it's yeah, it's very secluded. It's very military led. As you know, it's leader Kim Jong Un. He's got an iron fist, and he has a very special relationship with the communist countries such as China, Russia. I know he started cozying up to President Trump in Donald Trump's first term as president. We'll see what happens now, but a very, very interesting country, and people are warm, friendly, lovely. And yeah, I'd say that's one interesting fact about me. Not many people I know
Oh,
have
that's a
been
whole
to North
conversation
Korea.
waiting to be unraveled. Thank you for that.
Yes, yeah, we'll have it over dinner, that one, Kate,
Mm.
one day.
Mm, yes. So let's get into the meat of our talk, yeah. And going back to your origin story. So you've grown up in the Free State. I'm afraid of butchering the name again. Uh, can you tell us how your past shaped your values and your leadership styles?
Yeah, look, the town that I grew up in called Qwaqwa, pre 1994, it was a homeland, right? So many of your audience may be aware of South African history, specifically with regards to apartheid. The country
Mm.
was broken down into different homelands. There was Bophuthatswana, there was Transkei, there was Ciskei. Venda used to be its own homeland, and these homelands used to be run independently. They had their own governance, etc. And more often than not, these homelands were very tribal in how they were organized. So Qwaqwa was a homeland for the Basotho people. KwaZulu was for the Zulu people. Ciskei and Transkei, most Xhosa, etc. Bophuthatswana was the Batswana speaking people. But Qwaqwa was for Basutus, and we were a very humble, small country in the eastern part of the Free State. we had a lovely, I think we would call him a prime minister, Dade Mobedi, TK Mobedi. He ruled with, so much love for his people. He cared for the Basotho people in Qwaqwa, and he was someone that wanted to make sure that we get the best of the best. And I think up until today, Qwaqwa does have a reputation of being known as one of the, towns with the most schools per square kilometers. So there was a high concentration of schools and primary and high school, and even universities or tertiary institutions. At the time, it was called Uniqua. It's now changed to the University of Free State Qwaqwa campus. So from all the way from early childhood development to tertiary, Qwaqwa was known to be a hub of education. And in fact, both my parents were educators. So my mom was a teacher. My dad was initially a teacher, and then he became a lecturer. He used to work at a teachers' college where he taught teachers how to teach. And it's something that, I was molded in. I even joke with my friends to say, you know what, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. If I had, all the money in the world and there's anything I could do, what would that be? I would probably teach because I really enjoy it. And it's something that has shaped my upbringing. I'd say, when you come from a homeland like the one we do, the people that in Qwaqwa was, so there was really any white people in our hometown. It was mostly black, Basotho speaking. I did have the privilege of attending a primary school in the later part of my primary school years that had some white teachers, right? So I think that was my first exposure to white people as a race. It was called a multiracial school, but it was mostly, black kids from their homeland who were taught by white teachers. The school was called the Sentinel Primary School. Yeah, and I'd say that was my first experience to dealing or engaging with people that were different to me. And when I say different, I mean racially, even with language. I got to see Afrikaans speakers for the first time. Some English speaking teachers was also there. Our headmaster or headmistress at the time, Mrs. Modinger, I think she is of German descent, if I'm not mistaken. So she was predominantly English speaking. So it shaped my early years. I'd say all the way from primary school and going to boarding school in Bloemfontein, where I spent 5 years at an all-boys school in a very Afrikaner town. I learned the language quite quickly because I also used to work as a waiter during my holidays there. It was very formative years, got to understand team dynamics, people. Also there, I was in a boarding school, in a hostel for 5 years, also with people that were very different to me. And I'd say being molded in that environment also helped shape who I am and my character. It was a Christian school, it was an Anglican school I went to called St. Andrew's School in Bloemfontein. Beautiful, beautiful school, beautiful people, great teachers, and some of the guys that I stayed with there were some of my best friends. And then, yeah, then moved on to varsity in Grahamstown at Rhodes University for 4 years. Came up to Johannesburg to start my job as an accountant at Investec, where I spent my first few years after I qualified. I then moved to APSA. At the time, it was part of Barclays, and I'd say that's sort of my career trajectory from primary school to work. But in terms of what my childhood, the impact, growing up in an environment where I felt rich, and richness was not about wealth. It wasn't about material possessions. It was about the kind of people that, surrounded me, old people, peers. You feel like you're in a community where everybody treats you like you are their child. The spirit of Ubuntu is something that we lived and we experienced and we really felt. It was something that was part of who we were as a people. And it's something that I'm proud was quite key in the formative years of my childhood because it helped shape some of my own personal values. I was raised Catholic as well. I was an altar boy growing up. So I do have a bit of a, Christian values as part of who I am and what shaped who I am. But being an African to me and growing up in the town that I grew up in, where occasionally you'd see a Zulu speaking person, a Xhosa speaking person. Look, my mom is Zulu, my dad is Sotho, so I do have Zulu family and Zulu blood in me. Even though we are Basotho at home, I still regard myself as a, I guess you could call it a South African cocktail as far as African composition is concerned in my genealogy. So yeah, I'd
Yeah.
say those are the formative years, and Ubuntu, I'd
It's
say, is
very
core
interesting
to
because
shaping.
based on
Yeah.
what you've just said,
Mm,
you identifying yourself as a personal growth advocate. passionate about doing work that leaves impact now
Mm.
actually makes sense. So,
Yeah.
how I'm curious, how do you define? So, in our world, the leaving of impact, especially through business, is what we define as shared value. How do you
Mm.
define your efforts towards leaving impact to someone new in your circle?
You know, more often than not, especially with this generation, Kate, people want to see impact now, measure it now, and sometimes, reap the rewards of it now. I think for
Mm,
me, more sustainable and lasting impact sometimes requires us to do work that we may not enjoy the fruits of. So it's about, leaving a legacy. It's about leaving things better than you found them. And even though you may not enjoy the fruits of that labor, you are leaving things for future generations that will be grateful and build on that. And I'd say real impact for me is intergenerational and it's self-transcending. And it's something that you should do for the sake of doing what's good. Not for any recognition or reward, anything like that. That's good if it comes and it's a bonus. But I think intrinsically, when we do this work, it's very important to identify and align with people who just get it, right? Otherwise, some
mm,
people will be getting into certain projects, initiatives with the view of wanting recognition or getting awards or something that is transactional in nature. A real
mm,
generosity, real impact work should be work that we do without expecting anything in return. Yes, we do have jobs and we have to pay bills and that's part of what we get paid to do in our daily vocation work. But as far as impact and how you sort of contribute your skills, your talent, your time in doing that, you need to have the heart for it. And I'd say lived experience is one of the key ingredients that drive into it, but also understanding the people that you are serving and the people that you're working for. As a leader, I like Nelson Mandela's, approach to it when he speaks about servant leadership, that, some people like to lead from the front and say, hey, I'm leading, let's go this way, and they follow. For him, it's almost like being a shepherd where you stand, you watch your sheep, you watch your flock as they
mm,
go and they graze
mm.
from behind sometimes. And well, obviously, when it's danger, you'll go, you protect them if it's a wolf or some predator comes to try and threaten them.
Yes.
But being a servant leader is also about living a life of service. And to serve and to lead, you also need to learn how to be led yourself, which is another conversation also. But leading with the heart of being a servant, I'd say that's quite critical, Kate.
Thank you so much because what I'm gleaning from what you're saying is the value of patience,
Yes,
especially if you're focused on creating lasting impact. You don't necessarily have to give up because you don't see the fruits now. So,
absolutely.
in your introduction, you told us that you gave us the journey of how you've traveled through life and are now in finance through ABSA. So, in your experience, especially in the finance sector, uh, how can this sector itself become a driver for social change and not just focus on profit?
The financial sector plays an important role on various aspects, Kate. And firstly, I'm privileged to have worked in two great financial institutions in South Africa, institutions
Mm,
that, excel at what they do. The one that I work at, as you mentioned, ABSA, is Pan-African. So our impact extends beyond the borders of South Africa, where I currently am. We are in about 12 markets in Africa, including corridor markets in key jurisdictions like the UK, the US, through our New York office. The UK one is in London. We have a rep office in China as well. And we sort of developing some presence in the Middle East too. So I'd say it's quite important to position that doing the work that we do is to the service of the continent, right? But I'd
mm,
say the financial sector, with regards to its role, firstly, you need to break it down into the kinds of clients that we service. You service individuals, human beings, so people that day to day,
mm,
they need bank accounts to either get their salaries paid into, make payments, even invest where they have excess cash into savings products that banks offer. You have also a clientele that are made up of corporates. And I'd say there's probably two or three, but let me say two distinct versions of these corporates. You've got your smaller corporates that are almost SME or middle or large, let's say large, small businesses. And then you've got your big, sophisticated companies, sometimes multinational corporates that are headquartered sometimes outside of South Africa, sometimes South African, like in MTN, for example, which is present in many, many countries on the continent. These institutions and individuals have different needs financially. And as a bank, you have a view of them right through, right? So you essentially have a view of the finance ecosystem. Now, if you're a financial institution and you realize there are communities in our country that don't know much about money, they don't know much about finance, so financial literacy is an issue. These people wouldn't even know where to even, think about, where do I open a bank account? What is a bank account? What are the different types of bank accounts I can open? And how can a bank help me in my business to, let's say I'm a farmer somewhere, can this bank help me to not only grow my produce or give me the resources to be able to feed my family, but also how do I grow my enterprise or my farm so that I can plug into supply chains of certain retail outlets or even manufacturers that would need raw materials such as fruits or vegetables or whatever into their processes. And as banks, we have a view of the individual to make sure they have financial literacy. That's why one of the important ESG pillars that, let's say an APSA has identified is financial inclusion. And the concept of financial inclusion is all encompassing because you need to make sure that people that were also previously excluded are included in the finance world. How do you make products affordable to them and accessible to them? How do you also make products available in languages that they can understand? It's very important when you go to a previous homeland like where I come from. The ATM needs to speak in Sesotho. The numbers and the way it communicates with the consumer be in a language that they understand. And that's a key tenet of inclusion, right? Where you speak a language and you speak to the heart of the communities that you serve. So I'd say that at that individual level, it's very important that products and services are inclusive and also accessible. There are aspects of that also that require an individual to think about, how do I now migrate from being an individual? I've got a bank account, I'm all good, but then I have this business that I'm running at home. Now, more often than not, some people do that very ad hoc, informally, but it helps if they understand that, you know what, I actually need to open or actually register a company. I need to make sure that it's registered with the tax man. I need to have a bank account. I need to make sure that the bank also knows who I am through its KYC processes so that it knows that its director, which is the person that owns that company, is such and such. And then once that company is set up, then it will have its own separate engagements or interactions with big corporates that maybe needs their products and services. And that is a whole new game where now they need to understand, how do I set up financial statements, for example, for this company that I've set up? How do I file annual tax returns? What are my responsibilities as an individual in my own capacity versus this separate entity that I've now created? So financial inclusion and drilling down to financial literacy also comes to the point of now having to understand to make the distinction
Thank you. Thank you so much.
on a national
So,
person, one a corporate
mm,
person. So I'd say that's banks play a role in that too. And obviously we try to connect small guys into the big businesses value chains
yes.
so that they can have lasting procurement contracts, enterprise and supply chain development as part of our competency as an institution. And also we make sure that we incentivize both sides to do well. And obviously where it makes sense, we do provide some bespoke and well priced financial products for the small guys to make sure that they're able to also be sustainable in what they do. So yeah, let me pause there, Kate. I spoke at an individual and at a corporate level.
Yes, yes. It's a very good, especially for myself, and I don't know what our listeners will think of it. It's very good to get into a deep dive of what financial inclusion really means. It's not just a buzzword, but it goes into the
Mm,
meat or into the heart of who our customers are, in the language, in the kind of uh, education that they need, so that their money can actually
yes.
work for them. So thank you for that. So, Thabo, beyond your extensive and impressive work in the financial sector, you're also actively involved in mentorship and youth development. Yeah. So, could you please share with
Mhm.
us some of the values that you try to pass on in your mentorship work?
Yeah, look, mentorship is an interesting thing. Firstly, I receive mentorship myself. I've got great mentors, and my mentors are diverse, right? I've got men, I've got women, different races as well. And I
Mm,
try to use the relationships I have with my mentors to value, to benefit from what their areas of competence are, right? It's a combination of values that I get from my mentors personally, both professionally, personally, and otherwise. And whenever I find someone that I feel like, you know what, at this stage in my career, I maybe have outgrown a particular mentor and there's a new one that I've, felt that this person fits where I am and my, career and personal goals, I would then establish a relationship with that person and then they'd help me accordingly. And I'd say that's almost like a similar approach that I have with the people that I mentor. So, it's important firstly that people own and drive the relationship that I mentor. We can create, a framework in terms of timing, when we meet, how we meet, what I need them to prepare before we meet. They need to make it about them and make sure that they get value from the time that we spend together.
mm,
And the key aspects in terms of the values that you're talking about. So if I can give an example, there's a young lady that I mentor at my workplace, a very eager, very ambitious, hardworking young lady that I mentor. Every time we have our sessions, I always go back to our previous meetings. Okay, what we discussed the last time. What were the challenges you
mm,
had? Did you overcome them, or did you have a challenge in maybe having that conversation with that individual that you needed to confront? Because I also give guidance on how to navigate certain challenging difficult conversations that they need to have for themselves. Because if you can
mm,
imagine some of the people I mentor, especially young Black women, they come from environments where we taught, you don't speak to elders in a particular way. You need to be humble. I think as
mm,
Africans, there's certain way that we are raised that makes it difficult when you have to show up in the workplace to challenge our elders. We are
mm,
seen to be, not engaged because we have that particular attitude, if I could call it that, which is, really conditioned from early stages. But when you get into these workplaces, you need to be vocal, you need to be seen, you need to be able
yes,
to challenge, but also do it in a respectful way. And it's
mm,
one of the things that I, guide my mentees through to say, how do you make sure that you own your career and you're visible? Because visibility is quite important, especially when you've done good work and people know that it's you that has done it. We sometimes try to be very, humble, and sometimes that humility, may result in certain people taking credit for our work and they become promoted, etc. So I encourage the young people that I mentor, and this young lady in particular, to say, you've done good work, make sure people know about it, and celebrate it. Put it on your socials,
mm,
celebrate it at drinks, whatever you do in your workplace with your colleagues to sort of have social engagement and fun, because team building is quite key. And
yes,
make sure that you build on it, right? And the people that
yes, yes,
matter need to know so they can speak on your behalf in
mm,
rooms when you are not there and say this person is good for promotion, or they need to be, given a fairly decent bonus because they've done work that aligns with our strategy and delivers impact. So
that's
I say people
great.
need to be intentional on their careers,
Mm,
be consistent, but following up from what you previously discussed, I think there needs to be some level of continuity in the work that we do as a mentor and mentee to make sure we build on previous experiences so that the person can grow, be better, and actualize. Because I challenge my mentees to think beyond themselves, think beyond the near future, but what is your next? What are you growing towards? And what are the things you're doing now to plant seeds to get the fruits later of where you're looking to get to as a young professional? So I'd say that's essentially how I approach my mentorship relationships, Kate.
that's great. That's really great. So I don't know whether you're still going to use this young lady as an example for my next question, because uh, would love to know some of the out of the people that you've mentored, is there any that stands out in how they've embraced purpose and impact in how they're living their lives, not just professionally or in corporate, but also out there?
Yeah, look, maybe let me use a different example for this question. So
Mm,
there's a gentleman that I was introduced to. He's actually an entrepreneur. He started a business. He's in the real estate space, but he uses technology. He's someone that, a very smart individual, also humble beginnings like myself, and he's done so well that he's brought in some very key and strategic funders that has helped his business grow into what it is. The conversations that I have with him is around being comfortable to say no sometimes, because as an entrepreneur, we sometimes get so desperate and we fall into a trap and we invite individuals either as business partners, as shareholders, as board members, and sometimes we give up too much too soon. But my conversation with him is to try and make sure that he understands that you need to take pride in what you've built here and what you own. And we have conversations around the attributes of people that he would like to be surrounded by. What kind of a shareholder and business partners is he looking for? Are these people, aligned in their thinking? Do they have his best interest at heart? But importantly, do they understand the mission, the vision, and the purpose that, this enterprise have been set up to achieve, and can they contribute value? I think challenging a young Black South African to think strategically about how they make their business unique, stand out, and to be sustainable. I mean, I enjoy having those conversations with him, right? Because, at the end of it, and then later on when he comes back and he gives me feedback, is very enriching to see how he's been able to, say no to certain people. And sometimes he's, had to turn some people away. But when you see the progress of it, and I follow him on social media and I see how his business has also created a network of other partners, and that business is a great example of how they also create shared value, because it also services people that are previously excluded, and it's quite unique in how it's positioned in the real estate market, because it's a gap that he saw and that he's addressing, and he's using technology as a tool to be able to address that, while also having economic value and social value as well, which is squarely falls in the shared value space. So I think businesses that do work that is purpose work that is impactful, those businesses will grow very easily because people can see that this is transparent in how it's done and how it works. But I think the key thing for me in my relationship with him as his mentor is to see how he's also embraced the conversations we had around proper governance, because I think governance is one of those things that can trip you up as a young entrepreneur, to make sure that you're able to understand your reporting responsibilities. Who are your stakeholders? What are the different inputs and outputs that you get from them? And also, how do you make sure that your books, your numbers, even how your audit and risk committee set up and its responsibilities, is it able to effectively monitor your execution of your mandate with regards to reporting and those aspects, to make sure there's credibility in your numbers. So I know it sounds like there's a lot that we engage on, but when we have these discussions, I see sometimes how he also takes my advice when I refer to him to certain sources of information, the books to read, and he applies that, and he's gone to thrive. And sometimes I wish I listened to my own advice, Kate, because I see it's working well for other people. So,
Don't we all?
uh, yeah. So I'm proud to see. So that's an example of a young gentleman who's done very, very well that I've seen. And by the way, I'm not the only mentor that he has. He has other mentors too, but I contribute in my own unique way to him as an individual, because our lived experience is quite similar as far as our backgrounds. He comes from a vendor, which was also a homeland, and I come from Qwaqwa, which is a homeland. So you can imagine the similarities in our journeys and our upbringing. But where we find ourselves is where we, are able to then be each other's keepers.
I think this is a perfect example because, especially looking at the backgrounds that you both share, there's a subconscious socialization that comes into play, and you can be able to actually address it with him in a way that will make sense.
Absolutely, Kate.
Okay, thank you so much for that, and especially about talking about governance in small businesses. I think it's very important. Now, I noticed that you have a good knack for storytelling, and in our continued advocacy work at Shared Value Africa, we've uncovered a gap in African stories that share the ongoing impact of local businesses. So, based on your experience and your talent for storytelling, why do you believe it is so effective in purpose-led work?
Look, firstly, we are Africans, right? I think Africans are
Mm,
known to be great storytellers. Some of the biggest blockbuster movies, even in Hollywood, were inspired
mm,
by African storytelling. If you look at The Lion King, for example, how big it became.
yes.
If you look at, and even in the comic universe, if you look at Black Panther and how it sort of,
Mm,
created unexpected value for the Marvel franchise, and Disney, it's beautiful. So for me, I mean, I used to love the stories that my grandmother used to tell me and my parents when I was growing up. These were folk tales. In Sesotho, we call them ditsomo. It's essentially a
mm,
story about something that happens, and at the end of that story, there's a lesson that you learn.
yes.
And these were verbal stories that were told, right? And these were passed on from generation to generation. So, in English we say "once upon a time," and then at the end, they live happily after. In Sesotho,
Mm,
it starts Bareneri, and then as a child you say Oi, and then you
mm,
say the story, and at the end you say Kitshomo Kamatet, as in the story and the experience has ended. So for us, it's our storytelling has been very verbal. It's very creative. Our stories are very colorful also, and the language you use because. Stories growing up, these were told in Sesotho, but as you grow up, obviously you learn new languages, you actually understand how people understand concepts so much better if you explain them in a story. Storytelling is one of
mm,
the few ways that you can really empathize with your crowd because a story connects at a human level, not just at an intellectual level, or you selling a product or you're trying to show how a service works, but you're telling how that product or service can practically have an impact in a person's life daily, how they live, how they engage with their families. Storytelling needs to be all encompassing in how it touches various aspects of humanity. And that's part of the reason why I think, Ubuntu is very important because, the concept that I am who I am because we are. Umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. It's
mm,
very important that my success is linked to other people's success, and it's very unfortunate sometimes where we live in an age where storytelling through social media has taken a bit of a nasty twist sometimes, where it's become very materialistic. There's very toxic influences also in some of these spaces that teach young
yes.
boys and girls messages about identity, about things that are not in line with the values that, let's say, let me speak for myself, that are not in line with the values that I feel our society needs to work towards. But I'd say, storytelling, in addition to connecting to people, because it's an empathetic way of trying to relay a message, it also allows you to think creatively about what is it that I can convey and how can I convey it in a way that has the impact. And I think all of us should be storytellers because there is something that we can share that is deeply personal, that can connect with other people. Because the moment you start being, open and sharing some of those vulnerabilities, it empowers and allows other people to open up and share theirs too. And
Very
I think
true.
through storytelling, we are also able to build more bridges of understanding and connecting with people in the ways that we typically can't, and we are then able to build on those stories to then have more
Mm,
ways of connecting to each other and growing as people. So I'm a big fan of storytelling, and it's unfortunate sometimes that some of our stories, while they were handed down verbally, not all of them
mm,
I captured and documented in the way that they are passed down, especially in mother languages and mother tongue, like in
yes.
Sesotho, with
Yes.
Xhosa. I know you probably speak Swahili, and there's probably other languages in Africa that I feel,
Yes.
what, we need to do more to tell our
Mm,
stories in our languages to make sure that we also preserve that language because it's an essential part of our identity and who we are as a people. So as much as I'm an advocate of storytelling, I believe in the power of storytelling in our native languages too, because there we speak
mm,
to the heart. Um, and
yes.
it's something that there's something beautiful about storytelling in your mother tongue because when you say something in English, you put it on ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever you use, you ask it to translate it into, from English to your mother tongue. It misses certain aspects of and nuances of communication.
Very
For
true.
example, in Sesotho, when you are explaining a concept, sometimes you explain that concept by using lived experience. Say you use like farm animals as a way to explain the
Mm.
story of how depreciation works in the financial sector, right? And how certain concepts that you would explain in English go over people's heads. But the moment you explain it in their language and you use what they know and identify with on a day-to-day basis, the concepts stick. And part of the things that I believe in is teaching kids, especially in the early stages, some of these concepts in their native languages, because I think
Mm.
sometimes, kids have to almost translate first and then try and understand the concept in that foreign language. So it doesn't really stick that
Yes.
much. And it takes longer for them to be able to, grasp and understand. And people wonder why some African kids get left behind on some of these developments, especially in the technology space, because the language
Mm.
is not really there. Being able to use storytelling in education, specifically when you now bring in technology and how that has an impact on our kids and our future, it's very important that we sort of blend all of that together and be more creative in how we tell stories. So I think the era and age of storytelling is evolving, and in that evolution, we also need to be able sometimes to work with the right people to maybe influence some of these algorithms to make sure that they're able to understand the essence of how African storytelling works. So when you give that prompt to an AI tool, it's able to use some of these concepts and building blocks in relaying a story, or telling something in a way that Africans can relate to, especially in their mother tongues. So yeah, I know I've said a lot here and I touched on AI a little bit and I touched on because these are the things that I see on a day-to-day basis, right? And I
Yes.
try to make sure that we also stay relevant as Africans, even as we go about telling our stories, that our
Mm.
kids will also not get left behind as the world evolves, Kate.
So I want to pose a challenge for you.
Okay.
Is there, just briefly, is there a story, especially some of the stories that you had growing up, that moved you or helped to change your perspective? Can you share it with us in 1 or 2 minutes? Is there a
Sure.
story that comes to mind?
Um, I mean, there's several stories, but I'm trying to pick one that sticks. But there's a particular story about a young lady. So with our storytelling, there's often either a protagonist and then there's an antagonist, right?
Mm.
Um, this story is about a young lady. Her name is Tselane. Um, and Zelane is this young girl who comes from a loving family. And there's, because in Lesotho, we used to, I know some African countries also have this, where you have certain groups of people that are called cannibals. And cannibals are the
Mm-hmm.
people that eat other human beings. So in
Yes.
this story, there's a cannibal that, is the antagonist or the adversary in this case. But the story of Zelane is a story about her coming from a loving family, and here's this bad person that comes and essentially is up to no good. And it's a story about how this young girl is able to outsmart this adversary and overcome the adversary, who's very formidable, very powerful, and she uses her wit and her smarts to be
Mm.
able to overpower them and defeat them in such a way that she makes sure that this adversary doesn't harm other kids too in the story.
Mm.
And I think,
Yes.
when you grow up as a young man and you hear stories about young ladies and girls that are able to, overcome insurmountable challenges or what seem insurmountable, it's a story that we need to take in our boardrooms and in our corporate spaces to say, you know what,
Mm.
when we speak about gender equity in the workplace, when you're sitting in a boardrooms and it's just males around you, you need to ask yourself, why is it that we haven't thought that we need women in here? And it's one of the things that I'm really passionate about when you talk about gender equity, in that,
Mm.
workplaces really need to transform and be inclusive and be composed in the same, demographics of the people that they serve or the countries that they're in some way, shape, or form. But I'm an advocate for diversity. There needs to be equity in the workplace. People need to feel
Mm.
included. And importantly, in that diversity, equity, and inclusion, there needs to be an ultimate sense of belonging so that when those women are in the boardrooms, in the middle of it, they can say, you know what, I'll join the rest of this meeting virtually. I need to go and pick up my girls at a school, right? And I'll
Yeah.
still contribute afterwards. And even for men, because
Mm.
sometimes men need to play a bigger role in, say, childcare duties
Yes.
to say, it's my turn this time to go and, spend some time at the kids and maybe watch them play football or whatever. I know the term soccer moms is quite popular. There should be soccer dads and some of
Yes.
the language that we use. So the story of
Mm.
Zelane is a story of a powerful woman that overcomes. And I think as Africans, especially as African men, and even any other man from any part of the world that would be listening to this, we really need to empower our young girls to believe that they can and that they're capable of and they are worthy of the spaces that they occupy. And when they're there, they should take it and be themselves and really
Mm.
be proud of the ideas that they contribute. Obviously, they will have worked hard. They would have done everything to make sure that there is valued, and then there's intelligence and some intentionality in contributing positively to whatever that enterprise is. But they need to own that space and they need to own their ideas and be proud of them. Because what I found sometimes, especially using that young lady who I gave earlier as an example, sometimes
Mm.
ladies have this thing called imposter syndrome. They will wonder whether
Yes.
are they worthy to be there? Is my idea
Mm.
really the right idea? Can I vocalize it? And then while they're thinking about it, some dude has said a similar idea, but that's probably in worse shape than hers, and they get the credit.
Mm.
So I'd say, the story of Zalan is a story of trying to see how we can, as men listening to these stories, how we can also be better allies, active allies in the workplace to try and drive gender equity and to empower women to really, feel like they belong in these spaces. But we also need to be intentional when we see it's just us dudes that we correct that. Because that's not the world that I would like to leave behind for my daughter and future generations, Kate.
Me neither, me neither. So thank you. And as you said, every story in African culture always has a lesson, and you just
Yes.
extrapolated it perfectly. So as we wind down, do you mind sharing a nugget of wisdom with people who want to lead with purpose? Where can they start?
Yeah, look, leading with purpose, I think the best place to start, Kate, is within. I'd say, as individuals, you all have various responsibilities, we wear many hats, but I'd say the most important kind of work is inner work. It's very important that people understand who they are, understand their upbringing, what made them who they are today, and what contributed to that. What are the things that trigger them? What are the things that excite them? What values do they have? I think I haven't seen many people articulate what values they have and what are the things that they believe they can contribute, that can help them live up to their purpose. I think that's an important starting
Mm.
spot, Kate, because through understanding your value, you're also able to say no in cases where you see
Yes.
individuals or organizations whose values don't align with yours. At least if some overlap, you have a common, you know, uh, area where you can align with. But I'd say that that's quite critical to do the inner work, know yourself, and through that self-awareness, you are able to then see how infinite the internal universe is. And when you connect to the world outside of you, you are much clearer in terms of what is it that you're looking for, and you have a map, if I could call it that, that can guide you
Mm.
and you craft a way to the goal that you want to get to, and not only for yourself, but you also help others get goals because through that self work, you are then able to empathize with people in a way that they are probably not aware they need to be empathized with. So if I can
Mm.
give you an example, I know empathy is a term that we loosely throw around. For me, I think the best form of empathy is if someone has had a similar lived experience to me, and then they
Mm.
can be able to articulate that. I'm watching an anime show, for example, on Netflix. There's this young boy who's a vampire hunter and a demon slayer. And when he
Mm.
was a kid, he witnessed his mom being killed in front of him by a vampire, right? And then later in life, he comes across these people, and then they become almost like a group, and then they start hunting other vampires. Then he met another lady, a young lady, African lady. Her lady that made also the mom get killed. And this character says, you know what, I understand and I know exactly what you're going through and I empathize. And I think because he's
Mm.
felt the emotion, he's lived the experience, and he's able to connect with that character in that way, it makes his empathy that much more. So I think for me, when I go to my mentorship with the young gentleman I told you earlier, the lived
Mm.
experience that I have, because I've done the work to identify and know myself and know what has led me to where I am, I'm
Yeah.
then able to draw from those examples and stories of my lived experience that I can use as nuggets to illustrate a point when I talk to that young gentleman, because I can understand some of his frustrations, some of his challenges, because I've been through them. They may not be exactly the same way that he's going through them, but
Yes.
I know how I had to navigate similar challenges and overcome certain roadblocks, and that guides that individual along the way. So I'd say the first place to start always should be within, and that will open
Mm.
a wonderful chest of treasures that you will share with the world.
Perfect, perfect. I think that's the perfect way to close this conversation. Know thyself before you go out there to lead others with purpose and for
Absolutely.
impact. Yes. So thank you so much, Thabo, for sharing your wisdom and experience with us. You prove that when we lead with purpose, we unlock opportunities that create value for both business and society. For our listeners, remember, whether you call it shared value or impact, it is not just a buzzword. It's a way of doing business. It's a way of living life that prioritizes people alongside the end result that you want. And if you found value in today's conversation, please share this episode and keep the shared value conversation going on. Until next time, stay curious, stay impactful, and stay committed to the change that Africa needs. Thank you all for joining us.